Hey there, my wedding planning friends, and welcome back to my channel. If this is your first time here, thank you so much for clicking on my video. I'm Emily Summer. I'm a wedding planner based in Montana, and I make weekly videos on wedding planning tips and advice. So today's video, we are talking all about wedding vendors and the most important ones to have for your wedding planning and which ones to not scrimp on. So in my opinion, all wedding vendors are crucial, and I would highly recommend hiring out for every single aspect of your wedding. But I understand that there are many couples that are trying to save as much money as possible on their wedding and trying to DIY certain aspects of their wedding. And I completely understand that. So there are certain things that you can kind of DIY yourself and maybe not necessarily hire out to a professional. However, there are a handful that you absolutely 100% should pass off to the professionals in order to make your life a whole lot more stress-free and make your wedding day a lot easier. So number one is a professional photographer. For some people, they might not see this as that big of a priority. And of course, there's going to be a lot of levels when it comes to your wedding photographer in general too, as far as the pricing and the level of package you're going to have. So when it comes to choosing a professional photographer, there's still a pretty wide spectrum here as far as budget goes and what your priority is for your wedding photographer. But I do highly recommend, no matter what, hiring some type of professional photographer. Do not have this just be a family member that's going to capture some candid moments for you because you don't think your wedding photos are going to be that important to you. This is really the only thing that's going to be outlasting from your wedding day other than your marriage, right? So the only piece that's going to continue on past your wedding day and any remembrance that you're going to have of the wedding day is going to be the photos that you take from that. Number two is hiring a DJ. For a lot of couples, this seems to be one of the first vendors to go or to cut back on, or just have like a Spotify playlist or have somebody in charge of pressing play. And if you've been around for any amount of time, you have definitely heard me talk about the importance that I find wedding DJs to have when it comes to your wedding. They're not just somebody that's going to be playing background music or playing music in general for your wedding. Your wedding DJ really is the MC of your whole event, and they not only play music when appropriate, but they also will help manage the guests and get them to where they need to be, making announcements when needed, and just maintaining the overall flow of the wedding day and wedding evening. So I always recommend couples to never cut this out when it comes to booking your wedding vendors. And this is one thing that you should not DIY or just kind of put on the back burner as far as importance go, because your wedding DJ is going to hold so much more importance than you might think. Number three is a caterer. I have had some couples toy with the idea of providing their own food or having family members bring food and kind of do a potluck style or just supply all the food themselves to eliminate the catering cost. And while this can work if you have a smaller guest count and you are on a property that will allow for good food storage and food prep and that kind of a thing, it can be possible. However, I really do not recommend this. There's so much work that goes into prepping food for a wedding or for any large amount of guests. And if you are just going to kind of put that on friends or family members, that's a huge responsibility for them and something that they are going to have to prep days leading up to the wedding. And it's going to take away from kind of the enjoyment of the day, and they're going to have this huge responsibility on the day of your wedding and won't really be able to enjoy it. Let alone it's very difficult to estimate the amount of food you're going to need, and hiring a catering team that are professionals and experts in this are going to bring the right amount of food, they're going to ask the right questions, and they're going to be fully prepared with everything that they need for your wedding day without you having to think about all those tiny little details that come into wedding catering in addition to the food itself. So what are you going to serve them in, serving utensils, and all of the cooking and serving ware that you're going to need. And like I mentioned before, storage, this is a huge deal, especially if you are having food that is going to be prepped but still needs to be like cooked or reheated or prepped before the actual food time. So if it's something that you are going to be serving hot, when is that going to happen? Does that mean that whoever's in charge of the catering won't be around for your wedding ceremony because they're going to be heating up and prepping all of the food to be warm for dinner? And those types of things. So I highly recommend steering away from DIYing your food and hiring a professional wedding caterer. Number four is a florist. Now, I'm kind of split on this one. So I don't necessarily think that you 100% need a florist for all of your flowers. I know this is something that a lot of couples have opted to DIY at least some portion of their flowers for their wedding day, and I have seen this done successfully, so I'm not going to completely steer you away from that. However, I highly recommend that if you are planning to DIY your flowers, have a florist at least prepare your bridal bouquet, and ideally bridesmaids bouquets and boutonnieres as well, as these are going to be used in photographs a lot. You want to make sure that you have somebody that has a lot of expertise with wedding florals to create a bouquet that's going to not only look great, but going to last the day. As like I said, this is going to be photographed a ton, and you also want something that's going to hold up throughout the day because your bridal bouquet gets kind of a lot of wear and tear throughout the day. It's something that is photographed earlier on in the day for your detail photos and your bridal portraits, but then also through obviously your wedding ceremony and any portraits you're having after that, and sometimes later in the evening for sunset, golden hour pictures, or at some point in your reception. So you want a good, hearty bridal bouquet that's going to last you the entire day. And if you don't have any or much experience with florals, I highly recommend you don't leave this to you, as it's a pretty important task and detail of your wedding day. Some other aspects of wedding flowers, if you are planning on just doing some kind of bulk greenery or bulk flowers when it comes to your reception florals, those can be done DIY. But again, just make sure that you know what you're getting into and how much work it's going to be, and make sure you're giving yourself plenty of time ahead of time and not saving it for the morning of your wedding to be cutting stems and assembling florals for your wedding day. I also recommend having a professional florist if you're doing anything on an arch, anything that's going to be installed for the same reasons I mentioned before. You want somebody that is professional and knowledgeable with not only the timing and the weather and other elements that are going to play a factor into where your florals are going to be displayed for your ceremony, as well as the actual act of installing them. So you want something that's going to hold up. They're likely installed hours before your actual ceremony is going to take place. So you want to make sure that they are going to last that time, last through photos, and not be falling off in the wind or any other weather related elements that might affect your flowers for your wedding ceremony flowers. And number 5, this will come as no surprise to anybody, but a day of coordinator. Of course, I feel the need to say this. Now, do you need a day of coordinator to have a wedding? No, of course not. Do you need a day of coordinator to enjoy your wedding stress-free, to not be stressing about everything happening on time, everyone's where they need to be, vendors are arriving when they're supposed to be, where they're supposed to be, and things are getting done? Yes, yes you do. So if you envision having a wedding day that you can enjoy and be present and be able to speak to your guests and not be worried about behind the scenes things, then you 100% need to book a day of coordinator. For those of you that are trying to cut your costs wherever you can when it comes to wedding planning, I know things add up very quickly. I completely understand. Make sure you aren't cutting any corners where you're really going to regret it. Hopefully you found this video helpful. If you did, please like and subscribe to get weekly videos on wedding planning tips and advice, and we'll see you next week.